Thursday, May 11th, an almost normal group of people. That was as big of a compliment as I can get. Yes, there is best today. I do not know about next week. We have still not had official word. I think there's going to be best, so fingers crossed. We'll see.
Fingers crossed.
Because as we start getting into final exams, sometimes they want to make the class periods longer, and then as we get towards the end of the year, some kids don't use best well, so it becomes a matter of not having it, so the kids aren't running around like hooligans. It just goes back and forth. Today's shirt, also Princess Bride. Oh. So my birthday is in 1 week. 1 week after that, we have field day in the last day of school. So that's what I was talking about, the fact that we don't have a whole lot of time left. We don't have a whole lot of time left. So we are down to this very last little bit that we'll get a chance to get into. I will talk about quiz tomorrow and our reading today and stuff like that here in just a moment. Gavin?
Do we have field day with our first period?
Yes.
No.
Wait, how long?
It's like 2 hours.
I don't like Mr. Baker.
Oh no!
I don't like Mr. Baker.
Ooh, fruit by the foot.
I will do my best to find them.
What do you?
Should be able to find most of those things depending on how stuff goes. Outsiders test, I still have people who have not turned it in. Just my reminder to try and help them.
How? It's
Just
only
take
a
zero.
test.
I'm aware. I have kids who just took a 0. And I'm like, turn it in. But I can't force a kid to turn it in. I just keep reminding them.
What do you do after the 2 hours?
Then you go to classes.
What are you doing?
You just act like it's a normal day.
Whatever the teacher does that day.
What are you doing that day?
Telling a story.
Field day is first.
No, it's 2 hours.
Where you going?
Oh,
I want to do
Yes, it's 2
The
hours.
part where I just said it multiple times and you weren't paying attention.
No, I wasn't because I hear so many people.
I think it's 2 hours.
Hi, Michael. What's up?
Is field day the last day of school?
No, Michael.
I throw this on you.
You can. I mean, just like
Do
Gabby.
it,
took
do
the
it,
book.
Michael.
How many
Do it.
Okay, I didn't hear you. It
Just
was
like
too
me.
loud.
Like
Go, Michael.
I might ask.
Even
How many
here,
points?
Mr. Bogak, I have a
It's not
question.
Hang on. We have now had multiple people complain about how loud it is in here, so it sounds like I have to try and help out.
No.
I don't want you to be sad children,
No.
says the kid yelling out loud, helping to solve that problem.
Did you even see me throw it?
Yeah,
No, you didn't.
I didn't have to.
What? It was just because of them, right?
I did.
If they didn't snitch, then
You can snitch on yourself.
Yeah, you did just
Definitely blame them as opposed to taking ownership of our own choices. Twttin. So, reading-wise, tomorrow, the quiz is not in class. It is a homework quiz that we will talk about as we get into it. Your homework for tonight is not reading the book up to chapter 5. I don't hate you that much. I might hate you, but not that much hatred. All you have to do tonight is finish reading chapter 2, which actually is kind of a fun chapter, which we'll get to because I don't want to spoil it. We'll talk about chapter 2 in a second.
spoil
Then my goal is we will read 3 and then hopefully part of 4, and that gives you much less homework. Then it becomes over the weekend is to read the last part of it and then take a quiz, which will then be due by end of weekend. I'm trying to not stress you out any more than I have to, but we're to the part of the year again where those kids who read, it's a fast read. If you're not reading, again, it's probably not going to matter a whole lot, but I'm trying to do the best I can with getting you guys to read stuff like that. For here, my goal again is we'll finish chapter 1 and get into chapter 2 today, and finally get into actually some of the more interesting parts, and we're going to get past the boring beginning stuff. Let's see with you guys.
You're supposed to be on chapter 4, I thought.
I'm still in chapter 1.
Oh.
Let's see, you guys are period 5. So we're on page 15. Let's see, so we just got past this.
Yeah.
Beatings we got past. And hippies we got past. I added a new picture.
Where's one?
The guitar.
They were at Eminem had a million brothers.
That is correct.
That's me.
And then Brian, who's big and shaggy and then lies all the time. And then Mark, who looks like a lion and he spends his time stealing, which we'll talk about today. Then we got to Eminem, who's the 13-year-old who hangs out with him,
Is he in a
who reads
drugstore?
stuff like this. Looks like the war orphan with big eyes, has a bunch of little siblings. And then, ooh. So for this part of it, they mentioned that he wears an army coat or an army jacket, which is what people in the military would wear, and then a giant peace symbol around it. There is a term we talked about way back at the beginning of the year that would explain wearing an army jacket and then a peace sign around it, where it is the opposite of what you would expect someone to do.
Irony.
Is correct. So this is an example of where they would wear it ironically.
Shouldn't you get a money
I
tree?
get it now.
That's
Well,
why
we don't most of the class did. Now, we get past this one?
No.
No, so we're not to that yet. So
I
we'll
did.
get there in
Alright,
just
the
a
hot
second.
wire.
Yeah, we're going to talk about hot wiring a car.
Yeah, I forget where
It's
they go.
why one of them gets arrested multiple times.
Mark.
One second, I want to see. Oh, so you have gotten past the mic part.
Yeah.
Oh no, you were. Did you get past it? Because you were right in the middle of it before.
What?
The part with Mike and what happens to him.
I don't think so.
We'll find out. Alright. So then we are on page 15, home children, if you're following along, we're on page 15. And then halfway down.
She was on the phone.
No, she isn't. She makes good choices.
It was in my pocket and then I was putting it down there.
See?
Nah, you looked at it.
Yeah, because I'm texting. I didn't do anything.
I'm going to back up just one line. 'Cause he says, no, he says, my older sister, Kathy. 'Cause he says, remember him saying his sister came home. And he says, who is it? He says, my older sister, Kathy. Wrong voice. My older sister, Kathy. That's my 13-year-old voice, by the way. You know.
Don't sound like that.
Yeah, you all sound like that to me.
What?
Yeah. See, there it was again. Yeah. Yeah, I remember. I said, only, sorry, sassy sometimes. Only I didn't remember too well. Where's she been? She went to a private school last year and this summer. She's been staying with my aunt. She had to come home, though, because she ran out of money. She paid for it all with her own bread. Must be smart. I couldn't remember what she looked like. I never paid any attention to her. So is she as smart as you? No, Eminem said, still reading. He wasn't bragging. He was telling the truth. He was a very honest kid. Let's go over to the bowling alley, Mark suggested. Drugstore wasn't exactly happy with action. It was a school night and nobody was hanging around. Hey, you come too, Eminem. It was a long walk to the bowling alley, and I wished for the 100th time I had a car. I had to walk everywhere I went. As if he'd read my mind, which he was in the habit of doing, Mark said, hey, I could hotwire us a car. That's a bad thing to do. Taking something that doesn't belong to you. It ain't stealing, Mark said. It's borrowing. Yeah, well, you're on probation now for borrowing, so I don't think it's such a great idea. Mark could hotwire anything, and ever since he was 12 years old, he had hotwired cars and driven them. He had never had an accident, but he finally got caught at it, so now, once a week, he had to go downtown on his school lunch hour to see his probation officer and tell him how he was never going to steal cars anymore. I've been worried at first, afraid they were going to take Mark and put him in a boys' home, since he wasn't really my brother and didn't have a family. I was worried about Mark being locked up. I didn't need to. Mark always came through everything, untouched, unworried, and unaffected. Okay, Mark shrugged. Sorry, wrong voice again. Okay, Mark shrugged. Don't get shook, Brian. Do you guys know what hot wiring is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Why would you want to hotwire a car?
To get into it.
Yeah. So typically it's when you don't have a key. Normally it's when you're stealing a car, and then that is a way to drive it. So Mark, the friend, has been hot wiring since he was 12 and driving it, and we find out there's a story that'll come up later where he got caught and now he has to go on probation. My own father was an auto mechanic, and so he had a car that he lost the keys for. The only way to drive it was to hotwire it, which he thought was hilarious and I thought looked janky whenever we had to go pick up my friend somewhere, and he was out there like chink chink hotwiring his own car. But whatever. Also, you guys know what probation is?
Me.
If not, I can explain that because that's going to play a role coming up. Probation is if you get in trouble for a crime, if they decide it's not a really bad crime, bad enough for jail, you get what's called probation, where you get to be home on your own and stuff like that, but every week or every month, depending on what kind of probation, you basically have to go check in at the police station, where you go down there and they have an officer who talks to you, and you basically check in and go, hey, I've not been getting into trouble, I've been making good choices and stuff like that. So that's what Mark has to do. Every week he has to go and check in, and they talk to him about his poor choices. When I tell my stories at the end of the year, I will talk about me and probation, because that was one of the issues I got to deal with also. And so I get to pass along that story. Oh, this next part, since I've already stopped with you. There's a confusion he's going to have between this old poet from a long time ago, whose name was Lord Byron. But if you look at Brian's name, it's spelled almost the same way, but the Y and R are flip-flopped. So Eminem thinks he's related to this guy. Two completely different people. Okay, Mark shrugged. Don't get shook, Brian. Brian, Eminem said suddenly. Were you named after the Lord? What? I said, stunned. For a minute, I thought he meant God. Lord Brian, were you named after him? The poor kid had Byron and Brian mixed up. I decided to string him along. Yeah, I was. Was there a Lord Brian? Mark said. Hey man, that's cool. I guess it's cool. Like, what'd this guy do anyway? Oh, I can't tell you in front of the kid. Eminem shook his head. He wrote poetry. He wrote long old poems. You ought to write poetry just to keep up the tradition of the Bryans. You ought to keep your mouth shut, I replied, before I keep up the tradition of punching wise guys in the mouth. Eminem looked up at me. I realized from his hurt, puzzled look that he hadn't been trying to be sassy. So I punched him on the shoulder and said, okay, I'll write poetry. How's this? And I recited a dirty limerick I'd heard somewhere. A limerick is a 5-line poem. These were the original dirty jokes that they used to tell people. If you go on to this magical place called Google and you... dirty limericks are wrong and you should never look them up on Google. See? I don't know why the camera cut out. That was weird.
That's crazy.
Yeah, you know how technology is. And I recited a dirty limerick I'd heard somewhere. It made him laugh and turn red at the same time. Mark thought I'd made it up and said, that was pretty good. Can you just pop them off like that? I only shrugged and said, yeah, sometimes. Because then I would take credit whether or not it was really due to me. I was like that. I'd also lie if I really thought I could get away with it, especially to girls. Like telling them I loved them and jump when I didn't. I had a rep as a lady killer, a hustler. Nowadays we would call him a player. Yeah, he lies to women because he thinks it's fun. He's not the best person. I kept up the old Lord Byron tradition in one way. Sometimes I'd get to feeling bad, thinking about how rotten I treated some of these chicks. But most of the time, it didn't even bother me. Hey, Eminem, old buddy, Mark was saying, putting his arm across Eminem's shoulders. I was wondering if you might be able to loan your best friend some money? You ain't my best friend, Eminem said with that disarming honesty. But how much do you want? $3? I got 50 cents. Eminem reached into his jeans pocket and pulled out a couple of quarters. Here. Forget it. Me and Mark looked at each other and shook our heads. Eminem was unbelievable. No, it's okay. I'll get 50 cents again next week for babysitting. Is that all you get paid for watching all those kids? 50 cents? I couldn't get over it. 50 cents a week? I remember 50 cents is probably close to like $10, but still. Yeah, it's okay. I'll get 50 cents. Oh, I'm sorry. I think it's enough. I don't mind taking care of the kids. Who's going to do it if I don't? Both my parents work, so they can't do it. Anyway, I like my family. When I get married, I'm going to have at least 9 or 10 kids. There goes the population explosion, Mark said. Well, now that your sister's home, she can do a lot of the babysitting, I said, trying to be helpful. Eminem could tell we thought he was crazy. Kathy's got a job after school. She can't help. I don't know what I have to do to convince you that I don't mind it. Okay, I'm convinced. I was also tired of the subject, and I'd gotten to worrying about how we were going to get $3 before tomorrow. Charlie didn't get his rough rep or his bar by being nice to people, especially ones who couldn't pay their bills. By the time we got to the bowling alley, it was 10 o'clock. There weren't many people there. Mark and I watched a few games while Eminem stared into a package of M&Ms. I finally got bugged about it and asked him what in the Sam Hill was he doing. If you've never looked into a package of M&Ms, I tried to do my best. There's a package of M&Ms. Take a look. He handed me the package, which was open at the top. Put it right up to your eye. I did. All I saw was a bunch of candy. It's beautiful, ain't it? I mean, look at all the different colors. Yeah, I agreed, thinking, if I didn't know this kid better, I'd swear he was high. Let me look, said Mark. So I handed him the package. Hey, yeah, this is groovy. Look at all the colors. He gave the candy back to Eminem, looked at me and shrugged. Eminem got up. All right, I gotta go home now. I'll see you guys later. We just got here. Yeah, well, I just came along for the walk, and now I gotta go home. I watched him leave. The kid is weird. That's all there is to it. Mark lit up a cigarette, our last one, so we had to pass it back and forth. I know, but I still get a kick out of him. Come on, let's go catch up with him. There ain't nothing to do around here. Outside, I spotted Eminem at the corner. There were 3 guys trailing him. When you see something like that around here, you know right away somebody's about to get jumped. In this case, it was Eminem.
No.
Come on, Mark said, and we cut through an alley as to come up behind those guys. 3 against 3. The odds would have been even, except Eminem was one of those non-violent types who practiced what he preached, and me and Mark weren't carrying any weapons. So we slowed down to a walk when we came to the end of the alley. I could hear the voices of the 3 guys who were following Eminem. I recognized one of them. You guys should also recognize this character in a second. Hey, flower child, turn around! They were taunting him, but Eminem just kept right on moving. It's Shepard, Mark whispered to me. We were waiting at the end of the alley for them to come by. They didn't. They must have had Eminem up against the wall. We could hear him. Hey, hippie! Don't you answer when you're spoken to? That ain't nice. Curly, why don't you leave me alone? Eminem sounded very patient. So, Curly Shepard, Tim Shepard was the older brother. He's the one that ran the gang, was in the big fight, tried to find Dally. Curly, yeah, so Curly's the younger brother who kept getting arrested and being like in the reform school and stuff like that. He's also, Ponyboy tells a story about smashing a burning cigarette against his finger playing chicken. That's Curly, this guy. I moved over to the other side of the alley, just in time to see Curly pull out a switchblade, reach over, and cut through the rawhide string on Eminem's piece metal. It fell to the ground. Eminem reached down to pick it up, and Curly brought his knee up sharply and hit Eminem in the face. Me and Mark looked at each other, and Mark flashed me a grin. We both liked fights. We ran out and jumped on him, and the one we didn't get took off, which was a wise thing for him to do. Since we'd surprised him, it wasn't too hard to get them pinned. I had Curly Shepard in a stranglehold with one arm twisted behind his back, while Mark had the other guy pinned on the ground. How'd you like a broken arm, Shepard? I said through gritted teeth, careful not to loosen my grip. His switchblade had fallen on the sidewalk, but I didn't know what all he might be carrying. He liked to play rough. Okay, prove your point. Let us go, Douglas. That's Brian's last name, Brian Douglas. Curly said a few more things that I'm not going to repeat. He must have figured out who it was twisting his arm when he saw Mark. Me and Mark, always together. Curly had a special grudge against me anyway. Alright, so I used to go out with his sister. She says she broke up with me, which was the truth, but I was spreading it around that I broke up with her and was given all kinds of cool reasons. Curly was a little dumb. He belonged to a gang led by his brother Tim, known as the Shepard Gang. Really original. Tim was alright. At least he had a few brains, but I considered Curly a dumb hood. Look, we didn't hurt him. Quick pause. It's going to show up also the fact that Curly's sister Angela used to be going out with Brian, and then she broke up with him, which is going to be a big drama coming up. But to show you what not a good person Brian is, after she broke up with him, he starts spreading rumors about things that she did, and that's why she broke up, and none of it was true. He's just a bit of a jerk. But when you find out why she broke up with him, you'll see why. That was a lie, because Eminem was sitting there against the wall, and already his cheek was swelling up and turning purple. He was trying to tie the ends of the rawhide string together, and his hands were shaking. Let him go. I'm okay. I gave Curly's arm an extra twist for good measure, and then gave him a shove that almost sent him sprawling. Mark let the other guy up, but when he was almost to his feet, Mark gave him a good, swift kick. They left, cussing us out. Partly in English, partly in sign language. If you don't know what that means, they left saying, "You're number one." There you go. You're all number one to me.
Wow.
What?
Number one.
Does that mean flipping or something?
What?
Yeah.
No, you're number
That
one.
doesn't matter for you.
Can't believe
Yeah,
you
that
guys.
This is where you are too.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. See? Mark was helping Eminem up. Come on, kid. Let's get you home. The whole side of Eminem's face was bruised, but he gave us one of his rare, wistful grins. Thanks, you guys. Mark suddenly laughed. Hey, look what I got. He waved 3 $1 bills at me. Where did you get that? Although I knew good and well where he got it. Mark was very quick. Nobody had to teach him how to hotwire a car or how to pick a pocket. It was a donation, Mark said seriously, for the cause. This was an old joke, but Eminem fell for it. What cause? Cause we owe it to Charlie, Mark said. And then Eminem almost laughed, but instead winced with pain. Classic dad joke. I was really feeling good. I could quit worrying about Charlie beating us up. Mark suddenly poked me. Hey, you still in the mood for a little action? Sure, I said. Mark motioned toward their next intersection. There was a black guy standing there, waiting for the light to change. We could go jump him, Mark said. Suddenly, Eminem spoke up. You make me sick! You just rescued me from some guys who are going to beat me up because I'm different from them, and now you're going to beat up someone because he's different from you? You think I'm weird? You're the weird ones! Both Mark and I stopped walking and were staring at Eminem. He was really shook up. He was crying. I couldn't have been more stunned if he'd begun to dissolve. You don't see guys crying around here, not unless they have a lot better reason than Eminem had. He suddenly took off, running, not looking back. I started to take a few steps after him, but Mark caught me by the arm. Hey, leave him alone. He's just all uptight from getting jumped. Yeah, that made sense. That happened to me before, and I can remember how scared it could get you. Besides, Eminem was only a kid. He just turned 13. Mark picked something up off the ground. It was Eminem's peace medal. It must have dropped off when Eminem started running. He hadn't tied the ends of the string together very well. Remind me to tell him I have this, Mark said, stuffing the medal and the string in his pocket. Let's stop by, give this $3 to Charlie before I buy some cigarettes with it. Okay. I didn't feel quite as good as I had before. I was thinking about what Eminem had said about beating up people because they were different. There was a lot of truth to that. The rich kids in town used to drive around over in our part of the city and look for people to beat up. Then, like a year or so ago, a couple of kids got killed in that mess, and the fad slowly died out. But there were still gang fights around here.
Outsiders.
Is that talking about the
Nicely done.
outsiders?
They are.
Monkey tree?
Yeah,
Like
good
a
job.
monkey tree?
But there were still gang fights around here and social club rumbles and things like Shepard jumping Eminem happened every day. I didn't mind it much unless I was the one getting mugged. I mean, I like fights. Come on, maybe there's somebody to hustle in Charlie's. I grinned and ran to catch up with him. Mark was my best buddy. I loved him like a brother. So, nice catch on that one. Yeah, that is the reference to The Outsiders.
Do I get a monkey tree?
You do not, because that was my next question. Plus, you're not the only one who got excited about it, but nice try on that one.
I was reading ahead and I noticed I was like,
The part where they were getting ready to go beat up the black guy crossing the street, that's going to play a theme in the book also. Not just the idea of racism, but about being mean to people who are different than you. Because Eminem has a good point. Mark and Brian are all upset about the Shepards beating up someone different, and then they turn around and get ready to beat up someone different.
Correct.
So one of the things I like about the book is the author pushes the idea of don't be mean to people who are different than you just because they're a different gender or race or whatnot. That people are people.
They're being a hypocrite.
Yes.
Yeah,
nicely
you
done.
already said that, but
Chapter 2. Don't let them hate on you.
Yeah.
Bad
Who's
guy.
gonna hate?
I'm sorry, Dad.
So we'll get as far through chapter 2 as we can, and then I'll explain to you how tomorrow will work. The next afternoon, after Mark and me went downtown to the hospital to see my mother, she had just had a big operation. one that cost a lot of money. We'd sold our car, an old Chevy, our TV, this little black and white job, and anything else we could find to sell, but we were still short of money. I'd been trying for weeks to find a job. Mark scrounged around and came up with some money. I didn't ask him where he got it, and he didn't tell me, so I figured he just stole it somewhere. Mark was really bad about stealing things. He stole things and sold them, or stole them and kept them, or stole things and just gave them away. It didn't bother me. He was too smart to get caught. He'd been stealing things since he was 6 years old. I wasn't above taking a pack of cigarettes from a drugstore, but that was about it. I was the hustler, meaning player, liar. Mark was the thief. We were a great pair. One thing about it, though, Mark couldn't see anything wrong with stealing stuff. I mean, I could. It didn't much matter to me whether or not Mark was a thief, but I still felt that stealing was wrong. At least it's against the law. I think Mark was only dimly aware of that fact. Stealing was like a game to him, something to do for fun and profit, and he was careful not to get caught because that was one of the rules. So character-wise, Brian, main character, he will never steal, doesn't believe in it, but he will lie to your face, which becomes an issue later on. Mark, the other friend, never lies. Like, he'll steal from you, but he'll tell you the truth about it. Like, if he steals from you, like, did you steal this? He'll be like, yep, I did. And so he always tells the truth, but is happy to thieve. So that's why they're like, we get along great. I always lie, but never steal. He never lies, but steals all the time. So that was how we lived. Stealing stuff and selling stuff. Trying to save money and eat at the same time. I never thought about it then, but I can see now that it was a pretty rough time for us. Anyway, yeah.
But like his mom's surgery been like $100, I think.
I don't know. I mean, all I know is whatever it was, because she's in the hospital, like in and out throughout the whole book. So she has some kind of bad health issue. So I don't know what all it is.
How much do you think the car would sell for?
Back then, you'd like get like a couple hundred to 1,000 the most. I'm thinking for like a new car. Mark and I hitched a ride almost all the way to the hospital. The guy who gave us a ride was this hippie with long hair and a beard and a Volkswagen bus. Those buses are really big with hippies. I don't know why. The guy said his name was Randy, and that he went to college in town, majoring in English. I figure he's a pretty brave guy. Mark and I look like tough guys. I mean, we look like the kind of guys who go around jumping hippies, which we'd actually done once before. We'd gone over to the city park where the hippies hang out just to beat up somebody. I wouldn't do it again, though. I hadn't realized those guys refused to fight back. And what happened to the one we got hold of, it made me sick. Mark felt the same way, so after that, we left him alone. With this hippie, we know this hippie.
Randy.
It's Randy. So, not Randy Marsh, that's a different Randy. Same idea, he's also a hippie. But with this Randy, it goes back to outsiders, because what was the big conversation that Randy talked about?
I don't like war.
Not wanting to get into fights, and why he wasn't going to be in the Rumble. What is it hippies believe in? There you go. So that's why it ends up being the same guy living in town. Also, Brian mentions that he doesn't seem scared of Mark and Brian, even though they look scary. Because who did Randy talk to in the outsiders that taught him that scary people, Pony Boy, are sometimes good people too. So that's why Randy's not scared of him at all. So, and they're going to talk about this thing called a hippie house, which is where a bunch of the hippies would go and live, and they'd all like pay rent together, and they would be there like peace, love, happiness, probably drugs.
I saw that in a movie.
Wait, do hippies do drugs a lot?
Yeah.
Puppies?
They do?
They're like
Yeah.
high.
Because they're like all happy. They're like,
Hippie.
Oh.
My sister wants to be.
What kind of drugs?
like weed.
Hot.
Yeah, they were big into LSD, probably mushrooms, pot, stuff like that. They didn't do they didn't do things like cocaine.
Yeah.
Then again, I don't think that really existed back then anyway. So, yeah, they just wanted to be happy and love people. Randy was telling us about this really cool house where a bunch of his friends lived. There's this old house they all rented, and everybody who wanted to could live there and groove in peace and goodwill. I didn't much believe him. I mean, there had to be a few sponges in a setup like that. And living with a bunch of people would get on my nerves, especially if they were hairy and dirty. But I was polite and said, sounds cool, even though it didn't particularly appeal to me. Mark was interested though. Asked Randy all kinds of questions about where this place was and who all lived there and if he knew about any other places like that. Mark was interested in lots of things. He knew all about the Old West and was nutty about Warner Brothers cartoons, so it didn't bug me when he got all excited about hippie living. When we got out of the bus, Randy held up 2 fingers and said, "Peace." Mark held up Eminem's peace medal, which he was wearing around his neck as a joke, and made a wisecrack. Then we looked at each other and cracked up laughing. We weren't being hateful. It was just funny. Mom was glad to see us, but she hadn't been lacking company. We had the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew everybody else's business, and all the ladies came up to see her, at least 2 a day. They also brought me and Mark junk like pies and potato salad. I got the pies, and Mark took whatever else there was since he couldn't stand sweet stuff. Cokes and an occasional M&M, just to be polite to M&M, was as much sweet stuff as he'd take. As a result, I was putting on weight. I wasn't in much danger of getting fat, since it seemed like I was growing an inch taller a week, and Mark was staying as slight and slender as ever. You'd never guess Mark was as strong as he was by looking at him, but I knew from our wrestling matches that he was as tough as a piece of leather. As usual, the last thing on Mom's mind was herself. We had no more gotten there and got hugged when she started telling us about this poor kid across the hall who never had anybody visiting him. How do you know that? Come on, there's so many people coming and going around here. How do you know about some kid across the hall? The nurse told me. Poor kid. He's not any older than you and Mark. It figured. I mean, her finding out about it. If there was a lame dog within 3 miles, she'd find it. It didn't bug me much, though. I mean, thanks to her, I had a brother. Brian, promise me you'll go over and see him. I frowned. Look, I don't know this guy. I'm not going to just walk in and say, "Hi there, would you like a visitor? My mommy tells me you don't have any." Brian, go talk to him. He won't talk much to the nurses. He's been hurt pretty badly. Poor thing. All right, I'll go see him, Mark said. And that's where we stopped.
Okay,
Can I put my stuff on my desk?
You can. I want to explain something first. Tomorrow, the quiz is not in class. It's going to be a take-home, homeworky quiz.
Wait, what?
My goal for you is I would like to read Chapter 3 with you tomorrow, but I want to talk about Chapter 2. There is a thing that happens in Chapter 2 that you will enjoy reading. It is a thing with this kid that they just talked about, Mike. He's in the hospital because he got in a big fight. It is going to bring up, if you read it, it'll bring up a conversation we get to have, one, about race, because it's a black-white thing, and also about gender, because it's a boy-girl thing. And so there is a good, fun conversation we can have, plus it's a fun thing to read. If you guys have read it, then I will talk about it, and then we'll read Chapter 3 together. If you've not read it, then I will have to read Chapter 2 to you. So this will go from class to class. Some classes will get through Chapter 3, some classes
Wait,
won't.
so Mr. Broviak, I shouldn't read,
All you have to do is finish Chapter 2. That's all I want.
How many pages is there?